Yes, go ahead.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Bergen County Islamic Center and I welcome you to this series that we started in Ramadan, strengthening family bonds. Before I take pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, please allow me to start with the hadith عن عبد الله بن عمر رضي الله عنهما أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال ألا كلكم راع وكلكم مسؤول عن رعيته. Surely every one of you is a guardian and responsible for his charges to the end of the hadith, and we are all in the charge. Since today's topic is strengthening connection with our teens ages from 12 to 21. This age, as when you realize that your child isn't a little kid anymore, or they are a teen. They are probably moodier than when they were young. They probably violent, depressed, abusing alcohol, drugs, or smoking, or facing other problems with friends, with school. Your teen challenge you, and he will test your limits and your patience, but they still need us, and it's time to tweak parenting skills to keep up with them. So how to ease the stress at home and help our teen transition into an happy and successful adult. All these questions and more we are going to answer today. And now I'm pleased and honored to introduce our dear sister, Sister Suzy Ismail. She is the founder and head communication consultant at Cornerstone. Cornerstone is a faith-based communication center that focuses on youth, identity, and relationship rebuilding. So, assalamu alaikum, Sister Suzy, and welcome to Bergen County Islamic Center.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I love joining you every Sunday, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. We enjoying your session, and all the parents are waiting for this session. And especially today, we have a lot of questions since the last week and also this week. Before you start, I just remind the parents, everyone, brother and sister, if you have any question, just type them in the chat box in the Zoom or Facebook, and Sister Suzy will answer them in the Q&A time. Sister Suzy, you can start.
Inshallah. جزاكم الله خير. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum everyone, and Ramadan Mubarak to those who are just joining us. This is the third session in the series that we've been doing every Sunday on strengthening the family bonds. And we've been working through every Sunday the overview of the family, beginning with how we can strengthen our marriages and that marital relationship as the core foundation for raising our children. And then moving into the following week, we spoke about strengthening the bonds with our children in those early stages from the ages of 0 to 11. And, towards the end of last week's session, we began to get a lot of questions about that preteen time between the age 11, 12, 13, so preteen and tween ages. And alhamdulillah, this is actually what we are going to begin with today. So in order to kind of bridge the conversation that we began in our last session and move it forward into our discussion today, we'll kind of begin with some of the topics that came up in the questions. I see that there is a question already, and as I see questions, if I'm able to answer them as I'm speaking, that would be fine as well. So you don't have to kind of hold on to your question and wait till the end in case you forget it. You're welcome to ask even as I'm speaking. And alhamdulillah, the lovely thing about technology is we get to see the questions on the screen as they come up. I see that there is a question asking how someone can listen to last Sunday's lecture. I believe they are all on the BCIC website or on the BCIC YouTube channel. And I'll definitely have Sister Radwa kind of give more information about that maybe inshallah at the end. All right. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. One of the first topics that came up in the questions last week was about confidence and the struggle that so many of our children have in those preteen and tween years with self-confidence, and how that struggle of self-confidence can also extend into the later teenage years, young adulthood, and even into adulthood, and how that lack of confidence can affect the choices that our children make and the way that they react to friends, society, influences, peers on college campuses, as well as in the high school and middle school as well. So let's start with a conversation about confidence. When we think about our children experiencing the changes that they experience within puberty, we realize that that is a time that can be very volatile from both a physical standpoint, hormonal standpoint, and also an emotional and psychosocial standpoint, because it's a time when our children are caught right between the cusp of feeling still like a child, and in many times being treated like a child by the parents, and yet being exposed through society, through school, to very adult-like themes, through books, through music, through shows on television, through movies. And so there's this beginning of an awareness within the child in those early years. We're talking about age 11, 12, 13, an awareness that they're not really children anymore. Again, when we look at the process of tarbiyah, we spoke in our earlier session, last week's session, about the 3 stages of tarbiyah that we have from age 0 to 7. This is the stage where the child is most attached to parents, where the parents are the role models, the security, the safety, those who the child looks to for guidance. And then we enter into the next stage, which is the stage of discipline, which is age 8 until age 14. And that is the stage where the child is needing boundaries, even though they will push against those boundaries. It's also the age in which the child tends to question identity, tends to begin to look around and realize that the world is bigger than just mama or baba. And they start to seek out affirmation and approval from friends, from society, from school, from their classmates. And that tends to trump or override the approval of parents at this stage. And then we move into the last stage of tarbiyah, which is age 15 to 21, where the child is like the vizier, and it's when the child is essentially going through a process of critical thinking. And we spoke a little bit about critical thinking in our last session when we spoke about the importance of moving our children from the process of rote memorization into the ability to use logic and use the knowledge that we've empowered them with in order to be able to make their own decisions as they grow older and older. So the lack of confidence, we usually see it developing in that second stage, which is that age from age 8 until age 14. This is the time when self-esteem can often take a very intense dip, because it's when our children begin to become more and more aware of how they measure up to the world around them. So as we mentioned, along with puberty, there's an awareness of the body, and that awareness of the body goes hand in hand with comparisons. You know, how do I look compared to this classmate? How do I look compared to this model? How do I look compared to this actor? How do I look compared to this singer? And so our children begin to try to understand their place in the world based on who they look to as a comparison point. And this is why role models and mentors are so important during this age. If you do have a child during, in those early years, those early preteen, tween years, it is critical that you are also equipping them with the ability to speak about topics and to understand topics that are sometimes difficult for parents to talk about. There are 2 books that I often, kind of recommend for parents to introduce to their children, for Muslim parents in particular. But there's one book, the author's name is Sami Khan, I believe, and it's called A Muslim Boy's Guide to Life's Big Changes. And there is a companion book to it, which is A Muslim Girl's Guide to Life's Big Changes. Now, I truly recommend that at age 9 or 10, depending on your child's awareness and depending on how you see your child developing, please, let your children read those books, and not just one. Not like if it's a boy, then he only reads the boys' guide, and if it's a girl, she only reads the girls' guide. But our children need to understand both genders and what both genders are experiencing and going through. And this isn't reading where you just hand them the book and say, read this, and then you feel like, khalas, like I did what I had to do. I taught them what they need to know about their body and about sexuality and about puberty. That's not the case at all. These are books that are meant to be discussion starters. So they're books that are meant to guide your child to having a conversation with you about the changes they're experiencing in their body, about the changes they may be feeling, the emotions they may be having, why they may be starting to feel desire towards the opposite gender, why there may be desire towards the same gender. And this is something that we need to address. We can't just shove it under the rug and, say, well, I can't talk about this with my kids. But instead, having proactive conversations with our children from the Islamic perspective, allowing them to understand that you are, as a parent, their safe zone. You are the one they should go to if they have questions about sex, if they have questions about homosexuality, if they have questions about gender issues, gender nonconformity, or body dysmorphia. You need to be that point of contact, and you can only initiate it when you start those conversations with your children and give them that safety, knowing that, mama and baba are not going to freak out if I say the word sex, and this is something we need to start educating our children about. We're all familiar, of course, with the statement of our deen, la haya fi din, that when it comes to matters of the religion, we should not be embarrassed to ask questions with haya, of course, with modesty, with a sense of respect. And we empower our children by having them ask us. Because if they are not going to ask us, then they are going to ask Google. And if they're going to ask Google, there are things that will appear online that will not be guiding them in the right direction. And if they don't ask Google, they're going to ask their friends. And a lot of their friends have not gotten their information from sound sources either. So be that point of contact. That is the first stepping stone in building confidence in our children, in building self-esteem, giving them a sense that their voice matters, that their questions matter, that who they are matters, and it's important to you. And when they can speak to you about body image, when they can speak to you about why they may feel that they're too short, too tall, too fat, too skinny, too unattractive, to why they will truly believe and embrace the words that you give them, because they have that sense of trust and respect, that mutual reciprocal respect with their parents, where the words of their parents become validated again, despite the comparison points with friends. Now, we brought up 2 points in this little conversation that were brought up last week as well in the questions. The topic of hayat and also the topic of friends. And I want to kind of talk a little bit about each of these in these early years, the teen and the preteen and the tween years. So as we said, in the second stage of discipline, this is when friends kind of rise in prominence, when our children begin to look to their friends as their role models more than their parents. And so selecting our children's friends, allowing them to have the space to grow and associate with others is really the responsibility of the parents. But not in such an outward way. It must be done in a subtle way. Meaning when our kids are younger, they're all about, set up this play date, mama, I want to see so-and-so, and it's almost easier for parents to navigate the setting of play dates. But as the children get older, when you tell them like, oh, why don't we have Muhammad come over? A lot of times if they feel that this is mom and dad trying to bring a good influence in their life, they're going to say, I don't want Muhammad. I want Mike, or I want Joanna, or I want Lucy, or I want, almost like seeking out the opposite of what mom and dad are pushing towards them. So instead, creating atmospheres that are encouraging and creating alternatives to what they may be seeking. So your 6th grader comes home and says to you, there's the spring dance that's happening in school and all my friends are going and I want to go to the spring dance. Again, our natural response to that as parents may be, astaghfirullah, why do you want to go to a dance? All they're going to do is kiss, and they're going to do disgusting things there. That may be our response. But instead, if we take that stance, first of all, discipline and boundaries. So we know the answer is no, but giving our children space also to understand what is it that's pulling them to this dance? So again, if the child says, well, all my friends are going to the dance and I really want to go, how do we create an atmosphere in which we can give our children a sense of encouragement and an alternative? So telling our children, you know what, the dance doesn't really align with who we are as Muslims, because there is going to be mixing in terms of the genders. There is going to be inappropriate conduct there. So rather than going to the dance, let's, go roller skating that day, and let's invite 5 of your closest friends. And sit with your child and try to understand who are the closest friends in their life. If they struggle and they say, I have no friends, nobody likes me, start exploring other options. How can you invite into their life the friends and the mentors that you want them to engage with? And this is, again, like, it's not an easy job, but we know that, parenting itself, it's an amana, and it's not meant to be easy, but it's something that we need to be able to strive to facilitate for our children. Now, along with friends, again, we often talk about friends from, the perspective of like 20 years ago, like physical beings that children are going out with or talking on the phone with. But we know that today, the concept of friends also exists in this online world in a very virtual way. So, we'll have children who will say, I've never met my best friend, but play Roblox together all the time. Or, my best friend is someone who I play Fortnite with, but, they actually live in another country. Or once they get into social media, the friends, and quote unquote, for those of us who have Facebook, we know our children are not quite as into Facebook as adults may be. They're more into Snapchat, and they're into TikTok, and they're into Instagram, and some of them are into Pinterest, or Twitter. But they'll identify people that they have never seen, but that they virtually speak to as their friends. And what we're seeing happening more and more frequently with the online world is incidences of catfishing, in which a child may go online and may think that they're speaking to another, 11-year-old or 12-year-old or 13-year-old while playing a game. But in reality, that person who is pretending to be a 12 or a 13-year-old of the same gender is actually a predator, or actually an adult that's trying to groom the child. So being very aware of who our children's friends are no longer just means, going to school and bringing cupcakes in during Ramadan so you could see who the children that our children interact with are. But it also goes a step further, meaning we need to know what's happening online. And as our children grow older, really being involved with that online world, meaning, and I say this often and I can't stress it enough, but if you don't know how to work Snapchat, go to your local library. They have classes about Snapchat for adults. Go to the high school. A lot of times they'll have programs intended for parents to understand social media. Know how the item itself, the online medium, works, so that when you come to guide your children, they don't look at you like, okay, you have no idea what this is about. You don't know what this is like. And the reality is, we often use the example of, if you tell your child, make sure you look both ways when you cross the street. Crossing the street is dangerous, right? But your child sees that you've never left the home and you've never crossed the street. They're going to look at you like, okay, you really don't know what it's like because you've never crossed the street. So the same thing goes for the online world. If our child thinks that we have no idea what TikTok is about, or what Snapchat is about, or, what those apps are that sometimes are hidden, underneath the calculator icon, then when we come to warn them against the dangers of social media, they're not going to believe it, because they're going to feel like, we've never experienced it. So how would we as parents know? So make sure that you're aware, you're active, and you're online. Now, the next question that usually comes up when we talk about friends online or the virtual world is, well, my child is, 12 or 13 or 14 or 11 or 10 even. My child wants a Snapchat. My child wants a TikTok. My child says all their friends have Instagram. And parents will often ask, what is a good age to introduce social media to children? And the same goes for asking the question of, what is a good age to allow my child to cross the street unattended? The answer is not going to be the same for everyone. Of course, you would never say, well, 3 years old is okay for them to cross the street, just like I would never say that, 8, 9, or 10 even is okay to have social media. honestly, when you look at cognitive development, you see that for most children, the ability to navigate social media, the ability for the frontal cortex of the brain to be able to make better decisions, informed decisions, usually does not come into place until that third stage of tarbiyah, which again, we know from our Islamic tradition guides us towards the different stages of our children. And that would be around the age of, end of 14, beginning of 15, 16, around the age of high school. And just from, again, a psychosocial standpoint, prior to the high school years, children usually are not equipped enough with the positive decision-making structure to be able to navigate social media. And of course, every situation is different. And I always have parents who come to me and say, well, my child is really mature, or some that will say, my child was very immature at age 14, 15, 16. It is a personal parental decision. However, when you look at the studies and you look at the research, you do see that middle school is the most critical age in which children who do have social media tend to make decisions that impact them in very negative ways online. We see this also in the early high school years. Again, even throughout college, we'll see poor decision-making sometimes in online world, and adults as well. But it's being able to equip our children with the tools that they need to be able to navigate the online world. And that takes us back to one of the first points we were talking about, which is confidence. The more confidence our child feels, the higher level of self-esteem, the better ability they have to connect with us, to speak to us without fearing, instant repercussions and misunderstanding or punishment, the more equipped they will be to be able to navigate social media. So build that safe space at home, build that ability to connect with your child where they have an openness with you, where they look to the parent as someone who understands. Not as my parent is my best friend so I can get away with everything. No, we said the second stage of tarbiyah is the age of discipline. It's when the child needs boundaries, even though they will push against them, even though they will say, oh, I don't want to hear no. The reality is that no makes them feel safe. But no with an alternative, no with an action plan, no with an ability to redirect the child towards something that is more beneficial. Now, tied with the confidence issue and with the online world, something else that came up as we were speaking earlier is the concept of haya. And there were several questions, I think, that we got last week about hijab, about dressing modestly, about how our children who tend to look to role models like, Beyonce or Shakira, or I think those are even very old role models or not role models, but pop culture icons. There's probably a lot of younger ones now, maybe Ariana Grande they watch, or I don't know who else happens to be popular, but, our children at this stage are going to be looking to these popular culture icons and wanting to emulate them. And again, this is no different than, for every generation growing up, there tends to be this looking to those who are in the limelight, those who tend to occupy, whether it's through Hollywood or through Bollywood or through, different movies and songs, that you look to them for fashion, for example. You look to them to see what are they wearing, how are they interacting, what's cool. So when we talk about haya with our children and we talk about hijab, first of all, clearly indicating to both our sons and our daughters that haya and that concept of hijab is an integral component for both male and female. Meaning if we tell our daughters, you need to cover and you need to practice modesty, and we should be telling our sons very same things, that they also need to cover, that they need to practice modesty, but also explaining to both our sons and our daughters what is the mandate of haya and why does it differ for males and females. This impressionable age is the age in which our children can unfortunately sometimes get sucked into some of the narratives that surround them, that, hijab is oppression, that what you wear shouldn't be dictated by anyone else, that what you wear expresses yourself, and to express yourself, you have to be able to make those decisions. This is, again, a narrative that is pushed towards our children to pull them away from faith, So during this critical period, again, we're in the teen and the tween ages, but we're starting to work our way up into some of the later teenage years now. So maybe our child is around age 13, 14. Maybe our child is about to start high school and we're worried about how they're dressing or the choices that they're making. Again, that concept of haya begins in stage 1. It begins when our children are still very, very young. How do we see this? There are parents, for example, who will sometimes lament the fact that their children in high school years struggle with putting on the hijab. They struggle with wearing things that are covered. And yet, when the child was, 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, the parents had no problem putting, a skimpy bathing suit on, or putting on, clothing that was very short. Our children learn from their experiences. And although some people will say, well, you don't want to make something haram if it's not forbidden for them yet. But again, the concept of hayat means we carry ourselves with a sense of modesty, with a sense of taqwa, where we are answering to Allah Azza wa Jal in all that we do. And so from a young age, when we do encourage our children and guide our children to, wear clothing that is modest. I know if you head over to Justice, for example, or some of the other girl stores that appeal to the younger generation, you have outfits, in a size 5, 6, or 7 that are incredibly revealing, that are, designed in a way to be almost, for someone who is voluptuous, to be very, in a way that's very inappropriate for young children. If you are purchasing those types of items for your child at age 5, 6, or 7, then that is kind of the trend that they're going to grow with. So recognizing and understanding that there is a balance in terms of the middle road, that we want our children to embrace the concept of haya, not as in haya is this scarf, because this is not haya. Haya is in how we carry ourselves, how we talk to one another. Haya exists even with the same gender, not just towards the opposite gender. And we see this more and more today when we're looking at issues of sexuality that are arising. So teaching our children haya with more than just words. So for example, how we carry ourselves and how we interact with people, what our children are watching on television. So again, if our kids are watching a television show and we happen to walk into the room, and I know for many of us, maybe growing up, this would happen. We'd be watching a show and it would be totally fine. And then, mom or dad would happen to walk in the one scene in which there's a kissing scene. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, how could you be watching this? Astaghfirullah, I leave you alone and this is what you watch, right? Rather than responding in that way, knowing that as our children are watching something, and let's say there is a kissing scene that comes on the television, or worse, since there's things that are on public television now that go way beyond that, what is our response? Sitting with our children and maybe asking them and talking to them and saying, what happened when that scene came on the screen? What did you feel? Actually engaging with their emotions. And if our child responds, with red cheeks and a red face and says, it was disgusting, I didn't want to look, engaging with them in that train of thought and saying, because this is something that is private, that's done between a husband and a wife, and it's something that Allah Azza wa Jal has sanctioned in marriage. This is how we teach them hayat, not by telling them it is disgusting, astaghfirullah, I can't believe you would watch that, but guiding them towards that which Allah Azza wa Jal has decreed for us. Sitting with our children and explaining to them the verse in the Quran that we spoke about in the marriage talk, they are your garments and you are their garments. Explaining to them why Allah Azza wa Jal has created this sense of intimacy between man and woman to be reserved within the marriage paradigm. Talking to our children about what that marriage paradigm looks like. Again, by the time a child is 14 or 15, or even younger, probably at, 11, 12, or 13, they have heard the word sex. They've heard it, whether it's from their friends or in movies or, shows or whatever it is they're being exposed to. If they haven't had a chance to understand it from their parents, again, they're going to be turned in a different direction. And a lot of times where they're going to get their sources and information from is not going to be beneficial. So we strengthen our children's identity, and I'm quickly glancing, I see something about identity and self-esteem here, but we strengthen our children's identity by guiding them towards the strength that exists within our deen. We talked last week about creating those role models for them, whether there's mentors, maybe a college student that we know from the masjid that we could invite over, that we know would be a good role model or a good influence for our children. Have them over, tell them, why don't you come by and, hang out or come for dinner. Invite families over that have children who might be a little bit older than your tween or your teen, that can engage with them and that can, kind of encourage them to grow in a way where they are carrying themselves with hayat. And please, please, not making the distinction between boy and girl, not saying, well, it's okay because he's a boy, it's okay, it's not okay because you're a girl. And we spoke last week about the verse in the Quran when the mother of Maryam alayhi salam said that, the female is not like the male, and how we can explain that to our children, not in Western terminology, this idea of, the feminist projection in a very negative Western sense, but instead from the Islamic perspective of what that means, that the female, is elevated in so many ways as mother, as wife, as daughter, and the examples that we have of that. So teaching hayat, teaching modesty, again, not teaching, by the time a child turns 11 or 12 and say, you're going to wear hijab because that's it, you got your period, you have to start wearing hijab. No, but guiding them from that young age, how is hijab linked to hayat? How is hayat the core characteristic of our faith? Why is it integral to both the male and the female? And consciously guiding our children toward that. So when that time comes, when Islamically, the hijab is a fard, it is something that the child should begin wearing, that the child has an understanding that goes beyond my dad made me do it, or my mom is making me wear it. Because again, that will only last for as long as they are under your watchful eye. And when they are not, they will no longer do it. So encourage, guide. Again, there is no compulsion in the deen. So this is not something that you force upon a child, but it is something that you encourage as much as possible, and surround them with influences that will help strengthen that sense of Islamic identity. So as we move forward, another question that was asked in the last session was about peer pressure, and particularly peer pressure and, certain substance abuse, whether it's vaping or smoking cigarettes or smoking weed. And, just as we speak about clothing, and a lot of times it's linked to females and the desire to fit in with the teenage friends in middle school and high school, and even in college at times, we also look at substance abuse as being something that is prevalent with both males and females. And a lot of times what we're seeing now, first of all, vaping, we know has become, unfortunately, a widespread phenomenon throughout middle school and into high school. And it is harmful. There's no doubt about it. But if you were to find, a vape in your child's book bag, if you were to find it in a child's room, if the school calls you one day and says your child was caught vaping in the bathroom, again, as a parent, first step is don't freak out. First step is try to understand why. What influenced your child? And don't immediately point the finger at friends and be like, it's the influence of your bad friends. No, you never know. Your child may actually be the one that's initiating, and trying to understand why. What is it about this item? What is it that pulled them in that direction? Why would they desire the vaping? And honestly, with most of the children that I speak to who, either get caught by the school with vape or their parents find them vaping, it's not that they actually enjoy the inhalation of smoke. Many of them don't even like the flavors. Many of them say it kind of tastes bad, but they do it because it looks cool, because it's about that fitting in. And again, it goes back to that core, the self-esteem, the confidence. If the child does not have the self-esteem and the confidence to say, this is who I am, and I don't need this external substance to fit in, then they become susceptible to substances, whether it's weed or it's vaping or it's, God forbid, things that are stronger than that, opioids and, exchanges of some of the mental health drugs. We see a lot of children who wind up taking their friends' anti-anxiety medications, and they'll say it's because I'm anxious. But again, having open dialogue with our children, having the ability to encourage them to speak to us about whatever is on their mind, and opening those channels of communication is the number one indicator of how we can increase confidence in our children. criticizing our children constantly, telling them that they're not smart, telling them that they're too fat, telling them that they're not good kids, telling them that they don't study, telling them that they don't do this. That negative thread of criticism very quickly gets tuned out by our children. And it gets tuned out in that they won't respond positively to it, but at the same time, it gets tuned in that it becomes a part of their persona. It almost becomes a part of their internal dialogue. So when they hear their parents telling them, you know what, you're not smart, you didn't get an A on this, or you know what, look at your sister, she's studying hard and she's doing so much better than you, or look at so-and-so's child, see, I see them in the masjid and I see them praying, I like the way they dress. This is not constructive parenting techniques. This is a surefire way to break down your child's confidence. You're not encouraging them through criticism. I think we spoke last week a little bit about languages of love. And in the Western paradigm, the top language of love reported by children during these, preteen, tween, and teenage years is the language of affirmation, meaning they need to hear, you're beautiful, I love you, you're brilliant. It's okay that you didn't do so well on this test. I know you're going to do better on the next one. Words that are encouraging rather than, you're so stupid. I can't believe you failed that test. It's because you didn't study. So changing our tongue. And again, we know that Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam was the best example of this type of empathy in knowing what to say and how to say it to someone, to win them over, to make them feel that sense of confidence, not to push them away and to make them feel a sense of despair in who they are. So as we move forward in the age range, so we've started at this preteen or tween age. We started at this age of 11, 12, 13. Our children are getting older. And as they get older, something that Sister Radwa had mentioned, you may start to see more of a rebellious streak in them. You may start to see a more contrary attitude as they hit that age 15, 16, and even 17. A lot of times you'll wonder, where's my sweet child? Who is this child with an attitude who kind of acts towards me in a way as if I, the parent, am the enemy? So there's a certain balance that has to be struck here. In those teen years, and especially the upper teen years, our children are beginning to view themselves again as young adults. And if as parents, we are still in hovering helicopter mode, we are still in the mode of stifling and suffocating, then the natural result that the child is going to move towards is this sense of rebellion, of pushback, of, I want to be independent, I want to be who I am. Now, with this sense of independence also comes the questioning of identity. And what we're seeing today, and this is, a very scary reality that we do need to address as parents and as a community, is that identity is no longer, inextricably linked to just who you are in terms of your family, who you are in terms of, how you dress, how you carry yourself, your ethnicity, your race. But identity is also linked very much so to gender and sexuality today. And so we see so many of our teens, and I can't stress this enough in the talks that I give on parenting, because unfortunately I don't hear it talked about enough in so many of the talks that we have about tarbiyah, is the fact that there is a completely subversive culture that is pushing our children towards identifying with sexuality and identifying with gender as a non-biological construct, but as a social construct instead. So it's no accident that Hollywood is kind of introducing in every children's show, every children's movie from a very young age, the normalization of homosexuality, the normalization of families that are not a two-parent, male-female type of dynamic. And we're seeing this constant normalization because there is this push in our society, unfortunately today, to create almost this focus on sexuality that pulls away from a faith-based identity, that pulls away from an identity that is rooted in morality, that instead builds an identity that is rooted in desire. And we talked last week about the nafs and the levels of the nafs, and the fact that, getting in through the door of sexuality by creating themes such as, love is love, by using rainbows, by using icons that are very almost warm and fuzzy feeling. The society's kind of way of entering into the dominion of our children is by creating this sense of security, of warmth, of love in a sexuality that plays to the nafs al-ammara. Feed your desires now. Don't worry about morality. Don't worry about faith. Don't worry about scripture. Don't worry about monotheistic religion. Feed your desire. And when you have a nation of individuals who focus only on feeding the desire, then you've kind of brought people down to the most animalistic nafs, that nafs al-ammara. And when we encourage our children to engage with the nafs al-lawama, the conscious self, when we encourage our children to identify and understand the nafs al-mutma'inna, we encourage them to strive past that base desire. And we equip them with the tools necessary to be able to engage in dialogue and conversation where they can honestly, fully, with confidence say, sexuality is not an identity. Sexuality is based on an action. When we give them the historical knowledge of how language shaped the concept of sexuality, when we teach them about the theory of sociolinguistic relativity and how words have power and are manipulated by society in order to create meaning, then we empower our children to have more confidence in their faith. But we have to empower ourselves first. We have to educate ourselves. We have to understand how we approach and answer the question that our child may have about, my friend is gay. Why do you hate gays? Why are you a racist? Why are you a bigot? Why are you prejudiced? We need to be able to understand how we can respond to that push to encourage the nafs al-ammara and the feeding of the desires. And that may be a whole other session where we just focus on, for our teenagers and our young adults, how do they approach issues of sexuality, since it is very prevalent, particularly in high school and college campuses today. So that also leads us into relationships. This is again, children get older, we're looking from 15, 16, 17, all up to age 21, relationships begin to gain importance and prevalence. I see a little sign that says my speaker isn't working. Can everyone still hear me okay? Is the voice okay?
The voice is okay.
Yeah. It's okay, yes, everyone can hear me? Okay, so we got...
It's hesitated.
Okay. It was on and off, it was cutting a little bit.
Okay, hopefully it'll work now. You can hear me okay now though?
Now it's okay.
Okay, inshallah khair. Let me know, give me a signal if it doesn't work again. Okay. So just to wrap up, I'm realizing now, subhanAllah, the time went by quickly and I still had a couple more points, but we can carry them over, inshallah, into next week's session as well. I think the last point that we'll wrap up with is about relationships. Our children in those young adult years are going to seek out relationships that go beyond friendship. These are the years where their friends are going to be dating. These are the years where sexual relationships, intimate relationships are going to come to the forefront, romantic relationships. These are the years where our children may begin again to look for more of an emotional connection with someone that goes beyond what in the past they may have viewed as a friendship. And so what's most important in terms of guiding our children towards relationships that are beneficial, relationships that are halal, relationships that don't fall into that nafs al-ammara stage of feeding the desire instantaneously, is to first strengthen the relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal, to build in them a love of Allah Azza wa Jal that really motivates that sense of taqwa, so that no matter what environment they're in, we know that they will be able to be guided not by their fear of us as parents finding out that they were texting someone of the opposite gender late into the night, or they were sexting, or they were chatting.
The
sound is not coming through.
Mm-hmm. So now it's muted. It's muted. It's off.
Okay, hold on. Okay.
Yes.
So good. Okay, inshallah. Okay, so this may be a sign that we should be wrapping up soon, since the sound keeps cutting on and off. But I'm going to pick up with relationships, inshallah, next week, because next week we are going to talk about building stronger communities, and it begins that affects the way that we as a family also connect and how we can connect with our communities.
So let's thank you, Sister Suzy, and we're going to the questions.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. There is a question in the chat box about, but I think you covered this topic about self. You can see the question.
So I see,
No.
I'm reading a question here that's in the chat. It says, I don't have a valid argument that Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla and SpaceX, is a good role model to follow. Instead of Charlie and Dixie D'Amelio, the most followed individuals on TikTok. Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates can't be compared to Jacob or Baby Ariel, the most followed individuals on Musical.ly. How do you take this discussion and this argument to our children? So I think that's an absolutely wonderful question. And I applaud the parent for knowing these characters on TikTok, for knowing these individuals, because it tells me that as a parent, you're aware of what your children are watching, who they're following. We also know that YouTube stars is a whole other realm in which our children are, almost obsessed in many cases with, different people like Emma Chamberlain. And there's a whole slew of individuals, whether they're makeup artists or different individuals who go online, videotape themselves, put it on YouTube, and then have millions of followers. So having these conversations with your children, again, and I think I can't stress this enough, conversations with our children need to begin with why. They need to begin with us listening rather than us talking. So if we go and engage with our children and we say, this is ridiculous. How are you watching this person on TikTok? This person isn't really beneficial in any way. Look at this person. We've already lost our children. So instead, sitting with our children, maybe as they're watching a clip or something, and asking them, say, what do you find interesting but from this person? Why do you follow this person? Why does this person capture your attention? Understand their why. Let them understand their why, because a lot of times when our kids respond, and they may say something like, I don't know, it's funny, right? Talk about what it means to be funny. Why is funny entertaining? Why is that what they want to spend their time on? How could something else be entertaining to them? So I would say start the parental agenda of this is who you should be following, or let's read a story from the seerah of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam because it's so much more beneficial than that. No, start with the why and then bring in what you're trying to introduce. Can I show you something that I find inspirational? And in this way, we win our children's confidence again in having them feel validated that we want to listen to their why.
Yes.
I see another question here.
Yes.
So, and I think we'll take these questions first, and then maybe there's other questions in the other chat. But it says, my daughter, who's 13 years old, feels excluded from others due to her Islamic identity. What are factors that prevent that from happening, and how she can develop high self-esteem? So we've talked a lot about communication. We've talked a lot about how we can connect with our kids. But there's also another component to it, and that's essentially developing self-love in our children. Currently, we are seeing the highest levels of depression and anxiety among teens and preteens. So right around that age of 11, 12, 13, 14, we are seeing the highest incidence of depression, anxiety, suicide ideation, and also self-harm. And when we work with children, and this is within the Muslim community, a lot of times, when I'll cite statistics or I'll mention what we're seeing, people will be like, oh, that's not us, that's the non-Muslims. But this is actually primarily in the Muslim community. And what we're seeing is at this age, there is a difficulty when it comes to self-love, that our children who are struggling with these mental health and difficulties and these socio-emotional difficulties don't love themselves. And a lot of times they don't love themselves because they haven't received the love that they're seeking, whether it's from within the home or within, from their friend group or from the school or from the environment that they're in. Now, that doesn't mean that as parents, we're not loving our children, because of course we love our children. Yani, that goes without saying. Our children are always going to be our priority. But how we show them that love may be different than what it is that they're seeking. So again, if our child is seeking a love that's couched in affirmation, they need to hear the I love yous. They need to hear the you're beautiful, and they need to hear it sincerely, and in ways that guides them towards a stronger sense of self-love. If their language is the language of gifting, then if we're speaking the language of service, they're not going to feel loved. If we're speaking the language of time and they want the language of touch, then they're not going to feel loved. So I strongly recommend that all parents, with your children, go online. There's a wonderful on Gary Chapman's website. He's the author of The Languages of Love, the 5 Languages of Love. He has this wonderful little quiz that can be done with your children. Remember why. Remember engaging with your kids, listening to them, validating them. You and your children can take this quiz, and it helps you identify the type of love language that you speak and the type that your children speak. And again, don't just take the quiz and walk away and be like, okay, like خلاص عملت اللي عليا, like I've done my part, I've taken this quiz and we're done. No, have the conversation with the child. Ask them, well, how do you feel about this question? And wait, why did you answer this question that way? Or let your child feel like you as a parent are a real person. Another aspect of self-love that really increases self-esteem is when we kind of guide our children towards knowing that we've also made mistakes. As parents, sometimes we're so afraid to share like our failures or to share the struggles that we've been through, because we want to show our children this sense of confidence, this feeling that, what, I worked hard and I made it to this point because I worked hard. But it's important that our children know that, what, when I was in 11th grade, I dropped out of AP Physics because it was too hard for me. It's important that our children know that when I was, 7, I actually got in huge trouble from my parents because I did X, Y, Z. This is how we relate to our children, and it's not going to take us down a peg in their view, but it humanizes us. We're no longer these untouchable adults that they can't relate to, but we're able to share with them moments of our own childhood where we struggled. Maybe we had trouble relating to our own parents. Talk to your children about that. Maybe as parents also, we have our own trauma that we haven't worked on. And that's another huge indicator when our children struggle with self-love. A lot of times it's we as parents are struggling with self-love. Maybe there's marital problems. Maybe it's a single parent household where there's, issues of divorce that have rocked the foundation. Maybe it's a blended family where there's a remarriage and there's a step parent involved. We need to be able as parents to have our own level of self-love. And again, self-love is not arrogance. Self-love is being truly grateful for how Allah Azza wa Jal has created us, but also recognizing and knowing that we're all a work in progress, that there's always room for improvement, but that doesn't mean that we hate ourselves. So work on self-love as a parent, and that will translate into increased self-love for your child. Work on self-esteem as a family and be relatable to your children.
Yes. And I have another question, Sister Suzy. It's about disrespectful behavior. That some child used to value the interest or input from their parents, but suddenly in this age, they seems to even turn any conversation to turn into arguments. Yani it's in the small matters. How's your homework? How's your school? Why are you checking up on me? Did you trust me? That is turn it into arguments.
Yes. All right. That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. And I think first, it's very important. Last week, we talked about speaking the same tongue, right? That verse in the Quran in Surah Al-Rum, اختلاف ألسنتكم, and how it even applies to our children, that our children have different tongues. So what we as parents may view as disrespectful because of our worldview, because of our upbringing, because of our culture, our children may not be intentionally disrespectful. So when you tell your child, you know, how's your homework going? And they're like, why are you asking? I'm doing fine. My homework's practically done. We may see that as disrespectful, but the child may be like, what? I'm just explaining to you, you know? They may not be viewing it as purposely disrespectful. So being careful as parents first, not to label a child's action. So our response can't be like, you know, that's such illit adab, you know, don't talk to me like that. Again, our response first has to be matching our voice to the voice of the child. Our children tend to mirror our behaviors. So if we go in and say, how's your homework? And the child responds with like, khalas, like I'm almost done, stop checking on me. If our response is to raise our voice and to answer in aggression, that's going to increase the aggression on the part of the child. But if our response is to go near the child, maybe to put a hand on the child's shoulder, to tell the child, it sounds like you've had a rough day. It sounds like maybe the homework is bothering you, or maybe there's something else. Do you want to take a little break and then come back to it? You know, do you want to talk about it? Giving them that opportunity. And that 5-minute time we talked about last week, it is so important in this stage of tarbiyah, in age 12 to 21, where you're giving them that opportunity to know that they don't need to talk about something in this moment, but that they can return to it. And you're always going to have that open door to listen. So don't jump to the disrespectful card right away, because I hear that a lot from parents. You know, he's so disrespectful, or he has no respect for me, or she doesn't respect me in the way she speaks. And a lot of times the children, when you speak to them, that's really not their intention, but they don't know how to express themselves, and they have frustration and anger and maybe stress that they don't have the tools to learn how to put it in words where it wouldn't come out sounding aggressive.
Yes. And we have do we have time? We don't have time, I think so. For one more question.
Let's try to squeeze it in, and if I can't answer it this time, we'll carry it over for next time, inshallah.
But I think you can wrap up, because I think you cover it in your topic. It's about my child is 12 years old. He has friends, and he's a bad influence. You can address the issue without limiting his interactions.
Okay. So I think just like relationships is going to carry over into next week, we're also going to talk more in depth about friends next week, because it's such an important topic, and it can really affect not just our children, but us as adults also, who we are friends with and who we interact with. So let's carry that over to next week, inshallah, and we'll start off bi'iznillah next Sunday with relationships in terms of the community and in terms of our children, and we'll also bring in friends.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Suzy. That's a valuable and helpful session. It was definitely helpful to a lot of families. And اللهم نسألك التوفيق والهدى لأبنائنا. اللهم إنا نسألك لهم كل الخير في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم أجرهم من الفتن ما ظهر منها وما بطن. اللهم ارزقهم صحبة الأخيار وخصال الأطهار. Jazakallah khair. And sister and brother, just reminder to everyone, next week, inshallah, there is another session that will cover the interesting topic, strengthening community through our families, and also continue this topic today. So stay tuned to our next Sunday, 6 p.m. And thank you, Sister Suzy, again. And صوما مقبولا. Assalamu alaikum.
جزاك الله خير وعليكم السلام.